Welcome to the With Winning in Mind podcast. I'm Heather Sumlin along with Troy Bassham, and we have decided that we want to end the year by talking about some of our favorite episodes, favorite interviews that we've done. And I'm going to let Troy start. What is your all-time favorite?
Well, that's not a fair question because I don't think there's an all-time favorite.
Okay.
Because as we were discussing before this, we were coming up with different ones. You came up with a couple that, wow, I kind of didn't remember that one, and I'm like,
so
wow,
you're
that
saying
was
some
really
are
good.
forgettable. Now you're going to go there?
No, I think there's so many that it's hard to remember all of them.
Well, we started it July of 2021 was our first episode ever. So yeah, over the last 18 months, we've interviewed quite a few people.
I wanted to go to the non-obvious, something
Okay.
a little bit more subtle, because I was thinking, okay, what would be some things that I think are memorable, but maybe not as obvious as what many people would think. So, like most memorable people say, okay, well, you interviewed Lanny. What was the one thing he said? I think people would think that way.
Right.
Or clients that we've had a relationship with for years and years. There's got to be something you like there. So one of the ones that popped up to me was one that I think a lot of people would not think of, but I've had several people call me and talk to me on two specific podcasts that we did. And I'm like, well, I didn't really think of it. And then later when you go back and review it, you're like, oh, okay, yeah, that was an aha moment. So one of them that came up, which was interesting to me, was the interview with Jim Poteet.
Oh, I loved him.
Yeah.
I just love him. I think I could hang out with him all day and not get bored.
Yeah, so for those of you who don't remember Jim or who is Jim Poteet, he was the one that studied free throws for basketball, actually wrote, two, I say books, he says dissertations or something like that, but they're basically books if you look at it, how detailed they are. And basically why are free throw percentages not better, in basketball, like in college or in the pros. And one of the things that he pointed out, I don't think it was as clearly as far as verbatim, this is what he said, and everyone had the aha moment. It was more or less when he was talking about the situation. You're talking about a sport in which it's back and forth, and all of a sudden it stops. And it's all about one person and one action, a free throw. And he goes, everyone, when you watch, you'll see a lot of players that have physical routines. Similar to, he talked about golf, similar to what a golfer would have a pre-shot routine. Basketball players, when they're doing a free throw, have a physical routine. He said, but how many of them actually have a mental routine? And one of the things he was saying was when he stumbled on With Winning in Mind and started talking to Lanny, is he started realizing that, wait a minute, you are talking about what's missing. And that is you have to have a mental routine, so to speak, in conjunction with your physical routine. They must be in sync. Okay, so after going back and reviewing this, it hit me on the principle of consistency of why that principle makes so much sense.
Okay.
And do you remember the principle? The principle of consistency states your thoughts must be in sync with what you're physically doing. So think about free throw. What am I physically doing? Well, I'm trying to make this basket, right? No, that's what you want to accomplish. But what are you physically doing to lead up to that?
Well, you dribble.
Yeah.
You aim.
Yeah. And,
Right.
and so everyone physically can tell you what they're doing, like you just did. Where Jim was going is like, but what are you thinking about?
When he said he has like a 7-step process that he goes through, 7 different things he thinks about before he shoots. And then he goes into detail on that in our Patreon channel. So if you're not a Patreon member and you want to learn what are those things that Jim Poteet would do, and he also said that he shot 489 free throws in a row just to see how many he could do. And then he said, some people ask me, why didn't you shoot 500? He goes, I don't know. I got bored.
I could see getting bored doing the same thing over and over and over.
I don't even think he missed. He just got tired.
What was interesting, though, is some of our Patreon members reaching out to us and saying, I never thought about it from a team sport perspective. I'm an individual sport, but this guy's basically saying, look, when you have an individual moment in a team sport, if you're not defining what you should be thinking about, how are you improving the probability of being successful? That's what I got out of his interview is he's telling you you have to identify the times where you need to be in control of your thoughts, not the environment. You're not going to do it when you're running down the court. The game's too fast. But when it slows down and now you've got to make a free throw, all of a sudden the thoughts go any which way. It could go to the fans. It can go to a player saying something. It could go to the score. I have to make this. Putting pressure, and he goes, all that's inconsistent. So that was one of the things that came to my mind, but it was all because a couple of people contacted and said, hey, I didn't really realize this with team sports, but this is what I got out of his interview, and I thought it was really, really cool. So if you haven't watched it, that would be one to go back and look at, because it really hits with what mental consistency is all about in sport in general.
I also thought it was cool because, I don't follow basketball that much. I mean, I watch the high school team play because Ashley's cheering there. And but it's going to change the way I watch this season, because one of the things he mentioned too is how much the free throw scores matter towards the end of the game. That 75%, I think he said, the scores in the last 2 minutes of the game are free throws.
Yeah, 25% of all points in a game are from free throws.
And so if you're a basketball coach and you have not watched the Jim Poteet episode, or you're a basketball player, or your kid plays basketball, and you got to watch it and you got to share it with someone who is in basketball, because I think it could make a huge, huge difference.
Okay, so what's the one that came up in your mind as far as, did you go all the way back in the beginning, or was it more recent? What stood out when you were looking back and thinking, what would be my favorites? Because you talked about going back and looking at all of them and just, okay, what stood out, and then go back, and I got the impression of maybe ranking them. Mm-hmm. I kind of went through the idea, okay, what just off the top of my head comes to mind? If you look at for that, what just pops up in your mind?
Well, it's probably because we just completed a mental mastery for dog handlers series with Barbara Courier, and our first interview that we posted on our YouTube channel was an interview with Barbara. And Barbara's super cool anyway. She's the no excuses. You have no excuses in life. Just go for it, 100%. She likes to stand on boxes because she likes to be successful. And so she calls the podium boxes, so she likes to stand on boxes. And I remember we interviewed her right before the first time her and I were going to do a mental mastery for a dog handler series together. And so I went back and watched just a teeny bit of it earlier this morning, actually, because I was like, man, I want to remember something that she said. And it was interesting to me because I don't think that people realize that in dog sports, there's a lot of comparison that happens. And I don't know that the general public would look at dog sports as, well, what are you comparing? Well, you're comparing your dog to someone else's dog. You're comparing you to someone else or whatever. And she made this statement that whenever you're comparing yourself to someone else, you're missing your own small victories. Because you don't even see your own victories because you're too busy looking at what someone else is doing. And I thought that was key for so many people. I work a lot in pageantry, and comparison is a huge issue. And I think, wow, I can't even see my own success because I'm so busy looking around, the ring or around the trial at all these other people. And that's a waste of time. So I thought that was really cool.
But it's what we do in our society. So many people comparing individuals to individuals, groups of people to groups of people, sport, hard not to. Mm-hmm. I mean, just every Sunday or Saturday, depending if you're watching college or pro, right?
They're talking about football.
What are they comparing? The defense to the offense, the opposing team to the next, this player against this player. I mean, it's all about comparison leading up to the game, and we get caught up into that.
So we've been conditioned to compare.
And then at the end of the day, what Barbara's really pointing out that is eye-opening is that's taking away from your personal victories that's going to help you become more successful.
Yeah, you can't even grow your self-image if you're not paying attention to your own personal successes. It was just so key. So I loved that. That interview stuck with me, partly because she's just super cool, but then partly because of that statement.
It also proves why the performance analysis is so important.
That's the other thing that was interesting. I was going back and watching some of these interviews is how much people were focusing on and using that performance analysis. Yeah,
you would think, wow, it would be pretty obvious. You just journal some things. The key thing is that they're going back and looking at their performance in a productive way, rather than getting caught in the negative. This is what I didn't do. This is what I messed up on. This is what I got to fix. Rather than this forces them to think about what I did well today. Then what did I learn? And now move forward into the next.
It brings to mind Todd Bender's interview, because I remember him saying that when Dad said, "Hey, you're gonna keep a journal. Do you journal?" He goes, "I'm not a 12-year-old girl. I don't keep a journal." Because his whole thought about
so
I don't keep a
macho.
diary. What is this? And yet it was one of the things that he said. It was the key to turning his game around. So if you haven't watched Todd Bender's interview, so he was or is one of probably arguably the best skeet shooter in the world.
Yeah, American Skeet, before he started working with Lanny, he was already in the Hall of Fame, the National Skeet Shooting Association Hall of Fame. He was, I think, 13-time, world titles. I think he had 13 world titles at the time, was in the Hall of Fame. And then, he knew about Lanny, and it wasn't like they were strangers. It just, they didn't really know each other, but they knew of each other. And then he started working with Lanny, and then we had a chance to visit with him. And he's like, "Yeah, I'm not going to do this." But he made a point that I'm going to dive into this and do it, because what if I could learn something that can help my students? Because he's a full-time coach. He makes his money coaching skeet shooters, and he travels to New Zealand, all across the country. He goes to England. I mean, he's traveling. If they got American Skeet, he's probably teaching somebody in that area of the world. And he was a good writer already, because he wrote tons of articles on skeet shooting. So to me, I was thinking the opposite. I'm like, well, why wouldn't you keep a journal? Because you write all the time. He's like, why would I? I write all the time. It's like opposite.
Yeah.
But when he started to see the powerful self-image part to it, of even the days that didn't go well, there's something good that I can get out of it. And writing on paper made me realize today was productive.
And it's interesting, too, because I was watching Jane Kennedy's interview. So Jane was the one who, she competed in pageant. She didn't win Miss California. So she went on, she was first runner-up, though, so she got to like the Sweetheart competition, which is kind of like the runner-ups go and competed in national competition. She won. And she said, but what helped her to win was going back in that journal and flipping through and seeing, she's like, it was evidence. This is all the stuff I've done. I had doubt, and then I look through my journal, and I have no doubt anymore. So it's so incredibly helpful. So take your journal with you to competition.
So her performance analysis was her database to find success.
Absolutely. And she's like, and it wasn't even that I read every word. I was just flipping through wow, look at everything I've done. I'm awesome. I can do this. This is amazing. Well, so the journal is great.
We do have a lot of people that follow us regularly. It'd be interesting to see their points. So put the comments. What was your favorite episode or viewpoint? And if there's something you want us to dive in deeper, we can definitely do that. I know we have some people that we've got kind of, hey, can you bring this person back next year? There's some people that we've had some people that have reached out to us and say, hey, could you interview this person again? I'd like to know this or that, the other. That was interesting. That brought up the other one that I thought about was Kim Darty, where he was talking about training, and he never really connected that you need to build self-image at the same time you work on skill. He just always worked on skill. And so the idea of a progressive training or a sandwich training, was new to him. He's like, well, I never thought about that. But once he started incorporating that, all of a sudden, training became so much more productive. Consistently was better. And now he can go into tournaments feeling properly prepared. And it puts him into, I expect to play well rather than hoping to play well kind of thing. But I had several people that were on Patreon contact me and saying, hey, can you give me more specifics on how he trains and what he does? I thought that was a really good interview.
Yeah, and Kevin, for those of you who may not know, Kevin is a golfer, a professional player, and you completely transformed his whole thought process about training. And I also thought it was kind of cool with him that one of his best friends is Aaron Rodgers and Justin Timberlake, just the casual, just Yeah, just hanging out with boys.
Small world, a little 6
Yeah.
degrees of separation.
It was really cool. So if you haven't watched Kevin's interview, that's also a really good one. I
Yeah,
agree.
but those were the ones that came up to my mind. The other one I thought was interesting is I actually had a conversation with Lucas on this, and he brought up Bobby Rock.
Oh, well, he was probably one of my top 3 favorites.
And as far
to
as
watch again, like if I was to go back and watch again.
fun interviews, because we didn't personally know Bobby Rock. Brian, our brother, had met him years ago.
When he was in
And-
college, maybe?
Yeah, Brian was in college, and
Yeah.
he went to go see him. He was speaking. Brian got stuck in traffic, got there late. The signing and the meeting thing was already over, and the guy that was there, and Brian's just like, well, I brought this to give it to him, and can you make sure he gets it? And Brian actually met him and gave him the copy of the book, and so to Brian, he was, in case you don't know it, our brother played drums growing up. Actually was in a band in college, and I think still today plays a little bit.
I'm sure he likes to hit the drums every now and again.
Yeah, he's the
Pretty sure.
percussionist of the family, but he knows, like, if you ask about drummers, he just goes down the list.
Right.
Like, I can name you a few, but he knows every one of them. And anyway, fast forward, we're talking about 20 plus years later.
Yeah.
Bobby Rock now has a blog. He writes in this blog. He's all about health, fitness, performance. And
He's a very balanced individual. Like when you talk about like being balanced for performance and for competition, he gets it.
the conscious, subconscious self-image, you could just put a picture of him,
Yes.
and that'd be him.
It was a fascinating interview.
But when he referred to some things from With Winning in Mind,
Yeah.
then our brother reached out to him and just like, hey, because it's kind of surprising. The guy actually kept the book.
Yeah.
Who keeps the book of these years? And he was like, are you kidding me? He goes, there were like 3 things from that book that really opened my mind. And so then that spurred why don't we interview him? And what was really interesting is that you started to see very quickly how mental management not only helps athletes, but in his world as a musician, equally as important to that in the other fields that we have.
Oh, yeah.
And we joke a lot about, well, the great thing about mental management is it works for everybody. Okay. But we don't work with everybody. We don't work in all disciplines. We work with a lot.
Apparently we could.
But when you look at music, he says, oh, no, if you are not training in a way that builds confidence, how are you going to perform in a gig with confidence? And he kind of went into the direction of, now he called it interesting, people refer to it as deliberate practice, but I went back. He actually calls it, he thought hang on a second here. Intentional training is
I
what
like
he
that.
used. Intentional training versus deliberate practice. And I thought about that. I'm like, I kind of like that version
I like
better.
intentional.
But he was like, and he asked, when you're working with people, do you recommend that they should have an intentional focus on something they're training each and every day? And then we got in the discussion of training for field, training for the shot, training for the round, and how that looks in music, and how interested he was, and how it verified the way he goes about it was fascinating. So if you haven't seen that one, that would definitely be one to look at. Really, really fun interview.
What I found interesting is how much athleticism is necessary in drumming at the professional level. So he was saying that he would run and then play the drums, like to put himself in the environment to where you're tired and you're exhausted and then you still have to deliver. And I thought, who would go to such intense means to be able to try to simulate or duplicate that same feeling? And I thought that was fascinating. I'm not sure if he talked about that in the Patreon episode we did or if it was the podcast that we did. But so if there's anything that we're talking about that you don't see in the actual free version on YouTube, jump on our Patreon membership. You can still catch all of those extended interviews that we did with these people. But he was absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, the point he made, to piggyback off yours that was eye-opening, is if I don't prepare myself to play tired, I'm going to wind up playing a gig tired. Your fans don't know if you're sick. Your fans don't know if you just drove 10 hours from one city to another city. You had car trouble. You got in there. You only got 3 hours of rest, and now you got to go on stage and perform. As far as they're concerned, I paid money, and I'm paying money to watch you perform
I
and
want us to be
entertain
the
me.
best. Mhm.
And so the whole idea was putting his body through stress, like you were saying, mimics that. And that was that's simulation training.
Yes.
You're simulating what it's going to be like in the real situation. Because if you can't perform well in training, simulating it, what makes you think you're going to do it when it really, really needs to count? In competition. What's their competition? The concert.
Right. True.
But he gave a really interesting viewpoint, because I'm thinking there's a lot of athletes that don't even look at it the way he was looking at it, yet he's a musician. And a lot of people say, well, why do you care? You could just flub it. But the true fans know if you are. They know if you're not all in.
And you know if you're not all in.
Yeah.
And you're not going to give an honest performance if you're not all in.
But it was really cool how he tied into the self-image in music and how he uses it all through his career, even today. He's probably one of the most physically fit people we've ever interviewed.
Yes. And you know, the other thing that comes to mind from another interview we did recently, I think I'll never have anything but a round table in my kitchen ever again.
Oh, yeah. Anderson.
Steven Anderson talked about how much the dynamic of his family changed when there was no longer a head of the table.
Yeah.
When everybody was like equal. And then all of a sudden there's conversation at the dinner table, whereas before there wasn't, because you weren't all equal.
They go, we need a round table. We have an over table.
Is that the problem?
We need a round table.
We need a round table. Apparently, Lucas.
Let us know if we need a round table. Well, that was awesome. What I'm curious is to find out what other people's view are and what they have. And I know we have about 5 people that I know people have reached out to me and say, hey, I would like to know more about this, so we could bring them back. But it'd be interesting to see if we've missed something and other people are like, hey, what about this or what about that we could really tie into to help individuals and go back. And if we didn't mention anything, maybe we need to.
So a great way to start your 2023 is to go ahead and review some of the videos that we've done. Go ahead and comment with your favorite moments, your biggest takeaways, and who would you like for us to interview next? Do you want us to bring back someone from the past, or is there somebody new that you think that we should interview? Thank you so much for your time. Like this if you do, share it with a friend, and join our Patreon membership so you can learn even more from us and our guests.